Conspiracy theories have long been part of our cultural landscape. However, over the last 25 years, there's been a sharp increase in their popularity and influence. Two specific things that researchers point to for this increase are the rise and accessibility of the internet, as well as the 9/11 attacks. In one of the very first examples of viral misinformation, Nostradamus was the leading search query on the rise the day of 9/11 2001. This was because a text image had been shared online claiming that Nostradamus had predicted the attack. Quote that was attributed to Nostradamus was completely fabricated, but the amount of time and energy people spent into looking into it and propagating it, unfortunately, was not. 20 years later, when the COVID pandemic first hit, it served to elevate and reinforce the place of conspiracy theories in the public sphere. For example, online interest in QAnon increased tenfold in 2020 compared to before the pandemic. And interest in conspiracy theories continues to thrive, with many theories picking up millions of views on social media within days. For all these reasons, it's more important now than ever that we take a critical look at where conspiracy theories come from, why people believe in them, and what the consequences of them are. In this video, we'll be examining the whys, hows, and whats of the psychology behind conspiracy theories. Psychologists have identified three primary motivations that lead a person to believing in a conspiracy theory. These motivations can co occur, meaning belief in a conspiracy theory could be caused by one of these things or all three. It depends on the individual. The first psychological purpose that conspiracy theories serve is to give people ways of explaining things that are very upsetting, horrible, or confusing. In times of uncertainty, people naturally seek to understand what happened. However, not all explanations are equally valid or plausible. Conspiracy theories offer explanations that are speculative and often unfalsifiable, meaning they can't be proven wrong with evidence. Imagine your car is making a strange noise, so you bring it to a mechanic. The mechanic tells you that the noises are being caused by tiny goblins that disappear whenever anyone opens the hood of the car. You'd probably want a better explanation, one that you could test or verify in some way, because otherwise, there's no way to know whether the mechanic is right or telling the truth, or even if your car is safe to drive. This accountability through evidence is why falsifiability is so important. If we can't test ideas to see how true they are, gather new information, and then assimilate that information into what we already know, we will simply cease to advance. Essentially, conspiratorial explanations reduce an individual's uncertainty in order to achieve psychological safety by providing clear and easy to understand cause and effect relationships. However, research shows that ascribing to conspiratorial explanations actually increases individuals' uncertainty and confusion over time, especially if they've lost trust in science and experts. The loss of trust is key because that's the primary epistemological framework that's used in our society to inform public policy decisions. When we don't have a universally agreed upon epistemology, it becomes nearly impossible to achieve societal consensus and thus really challenging to make progress. The second psychological function of conspiracy theories is existential. That is, belief in the conspiracy theory gives an individual perceived control in situations where they feel powerless. Believing in a conspiracy theory can give the illusion of control because when you're on the inside of a conspiratorial belief, you believe that you're the one who really knows what's going on. Replacing what are often necessarily complex scientific explanations with simple hidden truths can feel empowering. However, again, research shows that belief in conspiracy theories leads people to have less control on the world around them, both perceived and actual. They're less likely to take meaningful actions, such as voting, engaging with their community, or even just making an effort to understand public health information. Even though the conspiratorial belief may temporarily soothe fear, it ultimately will leave people feeling less in control than they felt before. The third psychological function served by belief in conspiracy theories relates to the social nature of human beings. Especially in the post internet age, conspiratorial beliefs often come with a strong sense of community and connection. In some ways, these online communities can mirror the psychology of cults, particularly in how they handle information, misinformation, and disinformation, as well as how they encourage the vilification of outgroup members. People who tend to rise in the ranks in online conspiracy communities tend to be high on narcissistic traits and low on self esteem. This combination can lead an individual to double down on their conspiratorial beliefs because the social capital they gain from the popularity in the group becomes more valuable to them than the truth. These three reasons help us understand why, from a socio emotional perspective, someone might become wrapped up in a conspiracy theory. But how do we explain their reasoning process or lack thereof? Is it really the case that people who believe in conspiracy theories just don't have logic? Of course not. However, they're engaging in something known as motivated reasoning, meaning their reasoning is being driven by factors aside from logic. Our brain's primary goal is to keep us safe, both physically and psychologically. This can lead us to believing delusions and even noticing things that aren't there in pursuit of psychological safety. Importantly, these aren't hallucinations. They're illusory patterns that result from a phenomenon known as apophenia, which is our brain's tendency to look for and assign meaning to things that are actually random. All humans are affected by apophenia. It's not unique to conspiracy theorists. For example, if you stare at the clouds until you see things in them, that's an example of apophenia and motivated reasoning. In the context of stress and uncertainty, when motivated reasoning takes over, it can make conspiracy theories feel more logical than the truth, simply because it provides emotional relief. This idea is backed by research from cognitive psychology and neuroscience. A study from 2018 found that people who have a high tendency to observe illusory patterns are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. In terms of neural correlates, what humans pay attention to and find rewarding is associated with activity in the dopaminergic system. A person's dopamine regulation is determined by many individual and genetic factors, but it's also affected by environment. When we're in a heightened state of stress, our brains release more dopamine to make us alert to keep us safe. However, while we're in this dopamine enhanced state, we are more susceptible to something known as salience attribution, which is when something that is random is interpreted as meaningful. You may have noticed that there's a strong conceptual overlap between apophenia and salience attribution. Key distinction between them is that apophenia is a general cognitive tendency of humanity that some people just tend to do more than others. Salience attribution is the result of neurochemical factors assigning increased importance to illusory patterns that are actually random. When you consider all the ways in which our brains are primed to believe in conspiracy theories, it's not at all surprising that we've gotten to where we are as a society. And without a major intervention, it's probably only going to get worse. In one study, psychologists randomly assigned participants to one of three groups. The first group was exposed to a climate conspiracy message. The second group was exposed to a message that reflected scientific consensus around climate change. And the third group was a control group that just got a neutral message. After being exposed to the message, the researchers then measured participants' trust in climate scientists, participants' belief that there is scientific consensus that climate change is caused by humans, and participants' support for climate change mitigation policies. The participants who were exposed to the conspiracy theory message exhibited reduced trust in climate scientists, lowered belief in scientific consensus, and decreased support for mitigation policies. In contrast, exposure to scientific consensus messaging had positive effects on all three of these measures. Importantly, the results of this study were obtained after participants were exposed to the messaging for only a few minutes. If just a few minutes of exposure at one time was enough to sway people's attitudes, imagine what can happen if a person spends hours a day consuming it and being socially rewarded for it. And indeed, data do show that conspiracy theorists tend to spend more time online than others, are more likely to engage in online echo chambers, and tend to be more likely to use Facebook and YouTube posts from non verified sources as legitimate news sources. In contrast, scientists, people who have the ability to counter these grossly misinformed messages, are more likely to use social media for professional purposes, such as sharing their own research papers and building professional networks. So, not only are conspiracy theorists more likely to spend time on social media, in doing so, they're less likely to be exposed to educational and valid scientific content, which just compounds the effects we've discussed. Now, you might be thinking, well, maybe this isn't so bad. People should be questioning things, especially right now. Conspiratorial thinking is not the same as healthy skepticism. Kinds of conspiratorial thinking we're talking about don't lead to accountability or improvement of society. They lead to more confusion, increased mistrust, and the virus like spread of misinformation. The truth is, large scale conspiracies are exceedingly rare, and when they do exist, they're often revealed within a few years. In 2016, Dr. Robert Grimes published a key paper on the probability of conspiracies failing. In this context, a conspiracy failing means the information has been leaked. Once the information is out, it is no longer a conspiracy. There are two key assumptions about Grimes' model that you really need to understand to fully grasp how powerful it is. The first assumption of Grimes' model is that conspiracy leaks only happen intrinsically, meaning they only occur when someone who is involved in the conspiracy leaks the information, either because they share it with someone in confidence, like a spouse or close friend, because they speak out as a whistleblower, or because they leak the information accidentally or unknowingly. The second assumption of Grimes' model is that conspiracy leaks happen only at random, meaning there are no societal factors that determine whether or not a conspiracy leak will happen. Now, you're probably thinking both of these assumptions are completely wrong. We know in the real world that conspiracy leaks can happen intrinsically, but they also can result from extrinsic factors. For example, say an investigative report. Similarly, the assumption that conspiracy leaks happen randomly is also not true in the real world. We know that there are societal factors that will increase the likelihood of a leak happening. So, if we know that these assumptions of Grimes' model aren't true in the real world, why should we believe anything that comes out of his model? By assuming that all conspiracy leaks are intrinsic and random, Grimes' model actually works in favor of a conspiracy surviving. If a conspiracy doesn't hold up under these two very generous assumptions, then it's going to be much less likely to survive in the real world where these assumptions aren't true. Now that you know these two basic assumptions of Grimes' model, I'm going to show you what happens when we apply it to a real conspiracy. In 2013, Edward Snowden, a former NSA contractor, leaked classified documents about the United States PRISM surveillance program. This real life conspiracy involved over 30,000 people, and all it took was one person to expose the entire operation. And it only took a few years to happen. These events are exactly what would be predicted by Grimes' statistical model, which identifies two key factors that determine whether or not a conspiracy will be sustained. One is how many people are required to keep it up, and two is how long it's existed for. In short, Grimes' model proves mathematically that the more people who know a secret, the less time that secret will stay safe. Now, let's apply Grimes' model to a modern conspiracy theory. One that he looks at in his paper is the cure for cancer conspiracy. The cure for cancer conspiracy theory purports that there is a single cure for cancer that's being withheld from the public. To start, the idea that there's a single cure for cancer doesn't make any sense. There is no single disease called cancer. There are over 100 types of cancer with different causes, symptoms, and treatments. And up to 15 to 20% of cancers have very effective curative treatments. So, even at the outset, with a little bit of logic and data, we can pretty easily debunk this conspiracy theory. Nonetheless, for all the reasons we've discussed, there are millions of people who truly believe that there is a cancer cure that's being suppressed. So, let's give this conspiracy theory the benefit of the doubt and assume it's true for a moment. First, we need to think about the sheer number of people who would need to be involved. These include scientists and researchers, doctors, oncologists, hospitals, care centers, medical journal editors and peer reviewers, grant funders, clinical trial staff and patients, regulatory agencies, and insurance companies. Based on Grimes' model, conspiracy involving around 5,000 people would almost certainly be leaked within 4 years. If the number of conspirators goes up from 5,000 to 100,000, probability of the conspiracy remaining secret for 5 years drops to less than 1 in 10,000. The cure for cancer conspiracy would require almost 250,000 people to have kept the secret hidden for decades. These facts make its survival statistically impossible, with a 95% chance of being exposed in just over 3 years. And again, this is even with the generous assumption that leaks only happen intrinsically at random, which we know isn't true. In other words, you, the person watching this video, statistically have better odds of winning the lottery multiple times in a row than the cure for cancer conspiracy being true. So now you understand the why of belief in conspiracy theories, the how of belief in conspiracy theories, and the unfortunate what, which is that all of the social turmoil built around them is based on claims that mathematically and scientifically hold no weight. So, what do we do with all of this? We can't stop being human. We'll always crave meaning, connection, and a sense of safety, especially during times of psychological distress. We have to work to become more intentional about how we respond to fear, and above all, the content we choose to consume. Whether you intend for it to or not, the content you consume shapes you, and over time, you become a reflection of it. Choosing skepticism over cynicism is much harder, psychologically speaking. It requires discomfort, humility, and a lot of cognitive effort. But if we keep trading critical thinking for emotional relief, misinformation will win more than it already has, and we will truly be, as the kids say,